but hold on. There we go. Oh, now all you see is my great big face. Let's see if I can get those slides going.
We
So
can see
there we go.
yeah, there you go.
There we go. Okay. Oops, that wasn't right. All right. So my name is Sharon Wallison. I began my career a really long time ago as an accountant, and I've got a whole lifetime of creating all kinds of reporting, business reporting, and that led me through a lot of changes to get to where I eventually became a consultant for a Microsoft partner who worked with what was then called Dynamics CRM. It was version 4 of CRM, and CRM is the product that has morphed and become what is now called Dataverse for the most part. I mean, they're a little different. We're going to talk about that in a second. Here's all my contact information. Over time, I left the CRM shop that I worked in, and I went to work for the company called Pragmatic Works, which has since been acquired by 3Cloud. And I'm a Power BI specialist, but I have really strong background with Dataverse, what's now called Dataverse, Power Apps. And so I'm extremely interested in the place where these two worlds meet. And that is exactly where we are today. It's where Power BI and Power Apps meet, is these data flows, is one place where they meet. And this picture is what I do in my spare time. This is my 2 grandchildren and my husband sitting out on the porch. We spend a lot of time with our grandkids because they used to live in Spain and we didn't get to see them very often, and now they're here, so we see them as often as we can. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about using data flows to do imports into Dataverse. And to do that, we need to first talk about what a data flow is and what it's good for. And then I've got a really short comparison between the native Excel import and this data flow import. And then I've got demos. All right. Please, as we go ahead and put any questions in the queue, because with this data flow process, there's definitely some latency as data gets pulled into the UI. So if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the queue, and I'll try and answer them as we go. And if not, we'll definitely get them answered eventually. So I have this is where you should hear sirens, whoop, whoop, whoop. So as Microsoft does, this particular product has been the victim of name change way too many times, in my opinion. The product that I first worked with, called Dynamics CRM, became Dynamics 365. And then Dynamics 365 is not exactly the same thing as the Common Data Service and Dataverse, but the database that underlies Dynamics 365 was called the Common Data Service, and the Common Data Service is now called Dataverse. And so in essence, even though they're not exactly the same, these are equivalencies. So these equivalencies are important to remember when you have some kind of burning question that you're out on the internet seeking answers for, because the bones of Dataverse are exactly the same as the bones of CRM. Like, the framework is the same, even though they've added functionality clearly. The way that you get to that functionality is the same. So some problem that you have today may have been solved by some CRM developer in 2002, or I'm sorry, 2005. So it wouldn't have been 2002 because V1 was in 2004. And then the other language equivalency, that these are, again, they're not exactly the same if you're going to get real technical about it, but in the conversations that we're going to have today, and in many conversations that you'll see on the internet, table is the same as entity, is the same as query. So I wanted to just call that out especially for your internet searches. I think a lot of times that can be, you can find stuff that you didn't find otherwise. All right, so a data flow is just a collection of data that can be used to connect with other business data, and that data can come from multiple sources. It can be loaded, cleaned, transformed, and then pushed out to Dataverse or to an Azure data lake. If you have such an account, or that's a really great place to store a data flow, actually, because the storage price is really inexpensive. And all that can be done without any code, and it can be done one time, or it can be done on a schedule, automated on a schedule to happen repeatedly. And so I've got examples of a lot of this for you. And so, but first I want to talk about this. So when I was a CRM consultant and we were working with new administrators, we would schedule usually a 6 to 8 hour session with those administrators to teach them how to use the native Excel data import tool. And if you've ever used that tool, you probably are going to shake your head when I say what I'm about to say. That tool is finicky, it's janky, it's error prone, it's rough to work with. And so what we built into that 6 hour session is we built in mistakes that we knew would happen so that we could have people work through those mistakes and not be completely caught off guard when stuff didn't work properly. And it was, I think, for most administrators, it's a point of frustration, but you have to be able to import data into this database. So when I was preparing for the session, this table came into my head, and I just wanted to go through it real quick because you'll get a copy of it, or you already have a copy of it, so you can look at it in more detail. If you have questions about it, you can send them to me. But in both cases, the Excel and the data flow, you can make changes to the data, but with Excel, you don't get any record of those changes. And so what I always found myself doing and always found myself teaching is to keep just to rename, like give it a version name and keep a stack of files, because this data import into a database like this is almost always iterative. And so if you bring something in and it just didn't work and you have to roll back to the previous version, with Excel, if you didn't save that file separately, you have to start all over. You have to, first of all, remember, which for me is always a big problem, and then you have to undo the steps that you did after the place where you want to stop. So I always found that to get really complicated really quickly. With data flows, you don't have any of that, because you're going to see a sequential record of all of the applied steps to your data that you can go in and edit either in sequence or out of sequence. And I'm going to show you how all that works. Those data transformations will be applied every time the import runs, and that in a data flow, which is awesome. Like, that's worth the price of admission here. Both will allow automatic mapping to an existing table or entity in the database. I will tell you, the data flow mapping tool, I think, is not, it's still not quite up to snuff. I haven't been using it much because it's not there yet. You can actually create a new table or entity with the data flow. You don't have to go in and create the table in advance in some cases. Some cases you will, and we'll talk about that. You can use the data flow to automatically update on a schedule, and you can import multiple entities at one time, which is cool. Like that's one of my favorite things. And then with that Excel import, if you don't know, this is one of the first things we taught people in that 6 hour session. You must use the template that's created inside of Dataverse, and we would tell them 100 times, do not touch the first row. Don't touch the first row. If you touch the first row, it's going to break your import. Don't touch the first row. Don't change anything in the first row. So you don't have any of that with data flows. All right, so now I need to breathe a second, and I'm going to start the demos. So the first demo, I'm actually going to create a table using my, I'm going to create a table using my data flow. So let me show you how all that happens. I have to go to, so this is not what it looks like when you first get in there. So if you don't know how to get to Power Apps, you go to your Office 365 page and you just open the Power Apps Maker window, which is going to look like, not like that. It's going to look like this one. There we go. It's going to look like this, and it's got this menu down the side. And one of the first things, and the thing that I forget a lot, is to choose the right environment. You do that up here. If you have multiple environments, you have to choose the right environment. Different environments will have different restrictions on them. So that's usually how I figure out I'm in the wrong environment, is the one that I'm using has got some restriction that I don't expect to see there. And then in the data tab in this menu, there is a selection called data flows. And so when it comes up, these are the two data flows that we're going to work with, and you'll see I've already created them. So all I need to do is double click. So the idea that I'm going to show you here with this first data flow is we're going to create the entity and populate it initially. And then with the second data flow, I've created a secondary data import that's going to update that. And I'll show you how all that works. So I'm just going to double click it and it brings up, how do I get rid of that? You know, things are not working quite right in this. Hold on, let me move that. Maybe, there we go. Now I can see the X. There we go, feeling better now. So this is the data flow UI. Now, for those of you that have ever done any work in Power BI Desktop, this UI should feel a little bit familiar. It looks very, very similar and works very similarly to the query editor that's inside of the Power BI Desktop. So like any Microsoft product, it's got a menu ribbon across the top, and this one has these 5 tabs, right? And they work just like you expect them to. And there's a whole bunch of commands in there. And then there are 3 panels in the lower section. There's this query panel. This is each one of the connections that I made. And I'm going to show you, our next demo, I'm going to show you how to create all of this from scratch. So don't worry that I'm taking you out of order. I just wanted this to go a little bit faster. So these are just 3 queries that I brought in. And then when I click on each one, I see a preview of that query in this center section. And then way over here to the right, I see a list of all the applied steps against my initial query. So this step is showing me bringing that source in, and then there are steps that we added afterwards. And everywhere that you see that gear, that's a step that you can double click on and edit or view. So I'm going to double click it and show you, this is just showing me this is the source of my data. And if I needed to change it, I could change it right here and it would make that change. Oh, I didn't mean to, really meant to cancel that instead of okay. And then the other thing about that applied steps, so I'm clicked on the very first one. So in the preview, what you see is a preview of the data with only that step. When you bring the source in, it actually did these first 4 steps. So it let me choose what the source was, and then it brought in the source. These might be taking too long. Oh, good. They're moving a little faster than they were before I started here. So, and then it automatically promoted that first row to be the column headers, which you see in the next click. And then it's really smart. So it changed some of the data types, right? And then I made some changes. I renamed some columns, and I added a custom column called USD that I just gave a value of 1. And then I added another custom column that I just gave, oh, this one's going to be, that I just gave a value of EUR for euro. And then I gave it a key. I gave it a primary name key. And then what did I do? It looks like I changed a type. So this is what we ended up with. And all it's saying is on this date, this is the, if we have $1, we have 1.183 euros. That's all it's saying. And then this key has to be unique. And so I did that for euros, and then I did exactly the same thing for the Chinese yuan. And it looks exactly the same, pretty much. And then I came over here and I took the two of them. So I'm just going to double click on source so you can see what I did. I appended them together, right? And then I did some other stuff. But one thing that I did is I filtered the date so that everything was before April 1st. And that's my data flow. In the next demo, I'm going to show you how to do all that stuff, okay? But for now, I want to get this data flow running. So I just clicked next, and it's taken me to a window where I can tell the system where I want to put this stuff. So I got a suitcase I need to unpack, and I need to tell whoever's unpacking my suitcase where to put all my clothes so I can find them. So these first two queries are appended to create the third. So I don't need to load them at all. That's why they're in italics, because I've marked them do not load. And I've marked this one also do not load. Wow, got some latency. And then I've got this one, I'm going to load it to a new table. And when you click load to new, when you click on this, the default's going to be load to new table, and it's going to automatically pick up the name of your data of your query as the, it's going to append it to the, this is actually the publisher's prefix. And it's going to take the name of the table and append it with the publisher's prefix for a schema name. Just, I mean, very similar to what you see in Dataverse. And then I like to give it a new display name because that's the name that the users will see. And I'm just going to call it exchange rate. And then you see the mapping happened automatically. But what didn't happen automatically is it will always want to auto-generate a primary name. I don't like to do that because I think it makes things difficult for users if they're working in the database directly. So that's why I created this rate key. So I'm going to add that as the primary name. And then based on the data types that were in the query editor, it chose data types for the fields that it's going to create. And the only choice that you get is on the text fields, whether they're single line of text or multi. And then there's one more, let me talk about this a little bit. This right here, delete rows that no longer exist in the query. I'm going to give you an example of a time when I used it. I had a client that was a real estate client, and they had a big library of SharePoint documents, and associated with just about every single document was what they called a tripwire, which was really just an activity. You know, they were like renewals or renegotiations, and they were a little bit more complicated than what I'm going to describe to you, but basically we needed to create tripwires for each document in this library, and to make things more difficult, every day there were documents deleted or documents added. So we used a connector to connect to the library, which you'll see me do in the next demo. But what we did is we clicked this row in the data flow when we were done, because if somebody had deleted a record in the SharePoint library, we wanted that record not be in the database any longer. So we clicked that. I think that's a pretty good example. If you want to get rid of stuff that doesn't live in the source any longer, that's kind of a handy button. I'm going to click next and show you what happens now. I can either refresh manually or refresh automatically. This is the first one that I'm doing, and it's only going to run once. So I'm going to use manually, but actually, I'll show you that other button later. So I'm just going to go ahead and click create. So just like your Excel imports, this doesn't happen instantaneously. It takes some time. And so while whoa. Well, that is unexpected. I'm not quite sure why we have this. I've been running this workflow over and over and over again, and it's not. So there's something going on. I don't know what it is. And I'm not going to be able to troubleshoot it in the context of this, but I promise you this really does work. Wow, that's really. It's just showing me the mashup text. It doesn't like something in here. Wow, that's really, I'm puzzled because I've run this a dozen times and it didn't do this. Well, this is the webinar Murphy's Law. So I'm going to cancel this, and then I'm going to just talk you through this other, okay? Because what I did with this one, we're not going to be able to do what I wanted because the other table isn't going to create. So this one looks exactly like the first one, probably has the same error in it. Shh, that's crazy. Wow. My world's upside down. What is going on? So when you get something like I just saw, this is a really good learning moment, right? So there's some kind of error here because it's saying I don't have any records. So I'm just going to go, what I do when that happens is I go through step by step and see where the error is. So it clearly did the append, right? No problem. And it changed the column type. It changed this type. So my error has to be in this step. So what we could do is take a look at it and troubleshoot it. And you see it's a dynamic filter. This actually should work. Let's see if I can get it to work. If there's just some kind of glitchy thing going on. Well, there are none this week. Oh, probably because it's a new week. Oh, that's really weird. So it is actually working. It's doing what I want it to work, but there aren't any new records for the week. So what I had when I did this last week, there were records, and I made that filter dynamic because the idea is that when we run this data flow, it's going to be scheduled, and it will in fact just bring in the records on top for the week. That was the idea. So, but instead of that idea, now I'm thinking maybe the error that's in this one that was in the first one isn't in this one. So why don't we do that? Let's try and load to a new table. This is called winging it, guys. Let's see if I get the same error on this one. Oh yeah, okay. That's crazy. Something happened between last week and this week, and I apologize. But our next demo won't have this problem. So I am going to exit this and we'll create a new data flow. So to create a new data flow, so I like to work in solutions. And so in a solution, it looks like you should be able to create a data flow. You just go to the new button and you go down to data flow, and it looks like you should be able to do this. But this is relatively new functionality, and I just want you to know it doesn't work. You can't create a data flow inside of your solution. What you have to do is you have to go to the data flow page, create the data flow, and then you have to go back to your solution and bring in an existing data flow. And that's the only way I've been able to get it to work. Now, this is something I'm pretty sure that Microsoft knows about, and they just haven't gotten it fixed yet. And there probably will be an update that you won't even be notified about that will fix this, and one day it'll just be working. And but it's not working today. But what I do want to show you is I want to show you a little bit about this demo. So this is what we've got. Oh, wait a minute. Let me show you my data first. So this is the data that I want to bring into the database. And you'll notice it's a list of movies, and each movie has just a bunch of information about each movie. And then there is this column right here that we're going to be working with. And you'll notice each movie can have more than one genre. Makes sense. And the other thing you'll notice is if you look at like these, whoops, not that one, like these 3, 4, you'll notice that one genre can be related to more than one movie. So in database words, we have a many-to-many relationship between the movie and the genre. So that's going to end up becoming important here in a second, because let me show you what we got. So this is my many-to-many relationship, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to actually create a different relationship. We're going to create this, it's a bridge entity. So basically, it's just an entity that's got a lookup field to movies and a lookup field to genre, so that instead of having that one-to-many, we've got many-to-many. We're going to have a one-to-many from movies to genre, and then we're going to have a one-to-many from genre to movie genre, so that we can control the many-to-many relationship. You can create many-to-many relationships in Dataverse. I think that happened probably, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But you don't get full control over what the bridge, it'll create a bridge entity just like this one, but you don't get full control over what the bridge entity looks like, and I like to control it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do it my way because I'm the boss. So I'm going to now go back and show you how we're going to do that. We're going to go here, and one thing with lookups that you actually saw me try to create an entity using a data flow. The problem with that data flow was in my Power Query editor. It wasn't in the functionality. You can, in fact, and I've done it more than once already, create a new entity from a data flow. But you cannot do that if you want to use lookups. So what I did before y'all got here is I created my 3 entities. Here they are. They are movie, and let me just show you movie because there's something important about these. I just created normal entities. They're very simple entities, and I created the fields that I needed. Let me show you let me do it like this. So I just created these first 5 fields, and then I went over to this tab, the keys tab. Very important with a lookup. If you're going to be using lookups in a in a data flow, you have to assign a key. You don't really need to assign that key for any other reason. Like this table will function perfectly. If we didn't want to import with a data flow, it would function perfectly without this key. But I had to assign a key in each of these tables in order to be able to map to the lookup in the data flow. So that's something really important to remember. Now let's look at the data flow itself. So I'm going to go to data flows and I'm going to go to new data flow, and I'm just going to start one from blank, and I'm going to call it movie import, and I'm just going to create it. And then the first thing that we're going to see is a list of connectors. So right now today, there are 40 connectors in this interface. They're adding new connectors all the time. And there are two things I wanted to tell you about this. One is Power Platform administrators can create something called a data loss prevention policy, a DLP. And if your administrator has created a DLP, DLPs can be created either at the tenant level over all environments or at the environment level. So if, for instance, the administrator didn't want me to see anything in Salesforce, they would have created a DLP where they had assigned, where they had blocked these two connectors. And when I open this interface, they wouldn't be there. So if you're looking for a connector that you don't see and you've seen on the internet that that connector exists, that probably means that your administrator for some reason has blocked that particular connector, and a conversation with them might have them understand why it doesn't need to be blocked, or you may have to justify why you don't want it blocked. Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you about this is this interface has about 40 connectors, but there's another product that you can import. Basically, you're importing data flows, but it's a little bit more of a technical product. It's called Azure Data Factory, and Azure Data Factory has over 90 connectors. So if you don't have the connector that you need, first of all, you could create custom connectors. It's a little bit tricky. Or you can see if there is an appropriate connector in Azure Data Factory and try and go that route. So in my case, I'm going to import that text file. So I'm going to use this text connector. Oh, one thing you'll notice about this, it's searchable. So if I wanted to type in here that I wanted to use the text connector, I could just type text. Or there also are tabs where they're grouped by like connectors that sometimes makes them easier to find. And so I just want that text connector. And then I have to tell it where my file lives. And I'm going to be using all online sources for this demo, but you can use on-prem sources, but you have to use an on-prem source, you have to have an operational, either a personal or an enterprise data gateway. Wow, what's going on here? There we go. Let me go to my file, which is right here, and I'm just going to open that. And then I'm going to click next. So if I hadn't already logged into my Office account, I would have been prompted for credentials there. In case that happens to you, that wouldn't be unexpected. It takes a little bit of time, but what it's going to do is it's going to give me a preview of the data. And I don't think I've seen any connectors that are, I don't think I've seen any connectors that are, that don't give a preview. So here's my preview. It's just given me the first 200 rows, and I'm just going to tell it to, and it looks just like that Excel file, right? I'm just going to tell it to transform the data, and it's going to open that interface that I showed you a minute ago. all right? And it just brought it in, it didn't give it a name. So the first thing I like to do is I like to give that query a name. So I can rename it here by double clicking, and I can just call it, this is going to be the movies query. And the next step that I like to do is I like to choose the columns because I want to get rid of as much stuff as I can in the very beginning. And these are actually the same steps that I use with Power BI in case you're interested. So I want this and this and this. Oh, wait, I don't want that. I want this and runtime and genre, and I want the IMDb score. There we go. So I'm just gonna keep those. But if you look at them, there's some stuff in here that I want to change. So for instance, this is a date. You can see it's a date, but it's got a text type. So I want to change it to a date type. And so in this interface, I showed you the menu ribbons, but what I didn't show you is there are a lot of context menus. If I right click on the column, there's a context menu. If I right click on the query, there's a context menu. If I click one cell and right click, there's a context menu. So those have a lot of the commands that are in the menu ribbon are repeated in the context menus, and it's just a matter of what you like to do as to where you use them. I really like the column context menu, so I'm going to right click and I'm going to change this type to date. Oh wait, before I do that, I want you to notice something. Notice this guy right here where it says NA. So let's pretend like I didn't really see it, but I want to call it out to you because of what I'm about to do, because I'm about to generate an error that I know about. So I'm just going to change the type to date. I'm doing it on purpose. I have a method to my madness. And an empty coffee cup. So I got an error, right, where those NAs were. So whenever I get an error, I go over to the applied steps and I go up one to see if the error's still there. And I keep going up one till I find the error. So the error's not here. So somewhere between this step and this step, there was an error. It didn't take me very long to figure out that it had to do with this NA, because when I told it I want it to be a date, it has to be a date, and NA, not a date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a step between these two that's going to make that error go away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click again. Notice where I am. I'm not on the last step. I'm on the last correct step. I'm going to right click and I'm going to replace values, and it says, do you really want to insert one? Yeah, I really do. And the value that I want to replace is NA, and I want to replace it with nothing. So I'm just going to tell it OK. And so now I should have null where the NA was sometime soon. And so that's what I have. And then when I go to that last step, I think now instead of error in that last step, I'm going to have null. And that's what I have. Perfect. So now I have exactly what I want. I have a date type and I don't have any errors. And then in this column that says runtime, it's got MIN. And it also, there's some NAs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to replace values, and I'm going to replace NA with nothing. And I'm going to tell it OK, because I learned that lesson a second ago. And then I'm going to use a transform up here in the transform ribbon called extract. And I'm going to extract everything before the delimiter, which the delimiter is the space between the number and the minute. So I'm going to put a space in there and I'm going to tell it OK. And that should strip off minute. Oh, I should tell you one other thing that is a really good practice that I'm not going to do today because we don't really have the time. You can come over to the applied steps, and if you double click on them, oops, that's not right. If you right click on them, you can rename them. So I could say this was extract minutes. right? And that's a really good best practice, both here and in Power BI. All right, and then that is all I'm going to do with this query, but I have to create the other two queries. So I'm going to come over to the queries and I'm going to right click to get the context menu, and I'm going to use this command called reference. And all it's going to do is it's going to take this query at the last step and it's going to copy it. It's not really a copy, it's a reference. So I'm not actually storing this query again. You'll notice there's also a duplicate. Duplicate actually duplicates all the steps, and you can edit the steps in the new query, but I don't need to do that in this one. But what I do need to do is I need to change the name, because that's the thing I do first. And so you saw me over here where I double-clicked and changed the name over in the query list, but now I'm going to come all the way over to the right. Here's another place to change the name. And this one is going to be the query called movie genre, okay? And then in my normal pattern, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the columns that I want. And the columns that I want are title and genre. So this is probably the most complex transformation that I'm going to do today. So I've got this comma delimited situation happening here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the column by the delimiter, and that delimiter is a comma, but you see you've got all kinds of choices for delimiters, and there are some advanced choices here. So, but I really don't want to, well, I guess I do. I want to change this to 5 because I don't know how many commas there are. I'm going to, you know, if I was doing this for reals, I would have figured out how many commas, how many possible columns I have. And what this is going to do is it's just going to create a bunch of columns, but it's going to split each genre into a separate column. All right, and I've got a bunch of nulls in there, but that's okay because I'm going to get rid of them. All right, so what I want to do with this is, with these columns highlighted, I want to use a transform called Unpivot. And basically, if you've ever used the paste transpose command in Excel, that's what this is going to do. It's going to take these columns and it's going to turn them into rows. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unpivot. I'm going to unpivot columns. And so this is exactly what I wanted. So now I have multiple versions of, or multiple rows with the same title on them if they had more than one genre. And I don't need this column at all. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to get rid of that column. And I'm going to rename this one to be genre. And then I'm going to do one other thing that I like to do with text, and I'm going to trim it, because sometimes in an unpivot, you can end up with spaces, and that's going to, if the answer is crime, I want it to be crime, not crime with a space at the end. So I'm going to, I guess it's not here. Wait a minute. Let's go up to transform and text. Oh gosh, there's so many commands. I always forget where they are. Format, trim. There we go. In the query editor in Power BI desktop, there's a new feature where you can actually search for those commands, which is really a wonderful thing. Okay, so that's it for my movie genre entity. And now I'm going to create the last query. I'm going to do the same thing, reference. And this time, all I want is the one column, choose columns, genre. So what I want is a list of unique genres. So now I'm going to just come to remove rows, and I'm going to remove the duplicates. And oh, I forgot my own pattern. I'm going to change the name of this thing to just be genre. There we go. All right. that's it. Those are my changes. I see you guys have a lot of questions, and we're going to hit as many of them as possible, but I want to get this data flow running because it takes a little bit of time to run it. So see how it defaults to loading a new table? I want to load to an existing table, and you highlight each query separately. So I'm going to highlight movies and I'm going to load it to an existing table. And then I have to tell it which table that is. And in this case, that table, and these are schema names, which makes it really complicated. I know unnecessarily, but that's a Microsoft way. And so those are the columns that I added in my, those are the columns from my source going into the columns that I added in my table in Dataverse. So I just have to, so this is where I was telling you, AutoMap, it just doesn't work. And I would be looking, since this is new functionality, I think Microsoft will be fixing this. I don't know how long it'll take them to fix it. And they probably aren't going to announce when they fix it. You just need to try it and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you just have to move on. But I'm going to map these manually just real quick. I know that if you've got a really wide data flow, this would be really painful, but I think it's worth the price. I do, because what we're going to do is we're going to import all three of these queries at once. And you wouldn't be able to do that with the Excel import. So I'm going to load this to an existing table, and I'm going to go to movie genre, which is this one. Same thing, and I'm going to map it. But one thing you'll notice, these are those lookups. This first one is the genre lookup, and this is the movie lookup, and I can tell that because of the schema name. All right, and then I'm going to give it title. And you'll also notice the key columns came in automatically. That is 100% due to the fact that I marked that key when we were back looking at the table, okay? And if I hadn't done that, these lookups don't show up in the mapping list. So you have to mark those keys. And then finally, genre, and I'm going to load it to an existing table, and that existing table is going to be this one. And it's a very simple mapping because there's only one field. Let me get this thing going, and then we'll, so once again, I'm going to refresh this manually, but before we do that, I'm going to show you this. If I wanted to do this every day on a schedule or every week on a schedule, I would do this automatically, and I would give it the information that it wants here. But I'm only going to do this one time, so I always click that just because stuff fails, right? Stuff happens. And I'm going to create it. It's going to take a couple of minutes. Hopefully the problem that I had is not a system problem and this one's actually going to work. But yeah, great. Whoopee. So we just got it. See the green bar up here? It's telling me, yeah. Oh, wow. Wait, maybe it already worked. Let's check. There was a green bar up here saying your data flow. Oh no, it hasn't worked. It still says in progress. Okay, so I want to pull over. Well, I certainly don't want that. Hold on, let's get rid of my face. I'm going to take a look at some of these questions. Yes, we are going to record. Aha moment, thanks for the language alert. Yeah, language alert. We currently have bring your own device to export custom entities out of D365 for warehousing. We'd like to use the new data lake exports. That data, so can we export data into Dataverse from the data lake or directly from Dynamics 365? Yes, 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 you can. Let me, I'm going to totally butcher your name. Nagasatia? I hope I didn't butcher it horribly. Oh, it looks like he's gone. I'll follow up with him on that directly, but he's asking about something that's a little bit out of scope here. Let's see. Only one who gets the mashup errors. Yeah, thanks, Brian. It looks like the options in my windows are different to the presenter solutions page has an import button, but not the button to import a data flow. There may be some restrictions on your environment, Paris. So that may be the problem. If I understand the question properly, you're saying when you go to solutions and you go into a solution, you can't get, or I'm sorry, you can't, wow, I did that wrong. Let's see, you can't go to, you can't import a data flow. And if that's the case, there may be some restrictions on your environment. And I have a solution for that. And then you also ask about licensing. So this is something really interesting that I just found out this week. Makers do not need licenses to make apps. It's a lot like with Power BI, how you don't need a Power BI license to use Power BI. What you need the Power BI license for is to share what you created. And the same is true in Power Apps. You don't need a license to create a Power App. What you need the license for is if you're going to share your Power App. So the way that you can get access to all this functionality to just play with it and to see if it's useful for you is to use what's called a developer account. And it includes a personal environment over which you'll have total control, except for those data limitation or data loss prevention policies. If your tenant has data loss prevention policies on it, those will be applied to your developer account. And your developer account will include a Dataverse instance. Unfortunately, this data flow functionality is not included for a developer account at this point. I was really disconcerted about that. And there's no cost for that. And this is the link for how you sign up for it if you don't have it, okay? So I just kind of want to go over, before I finish the rest of the questions, and I think we'll have time. We're really running short. These were the steps that I used for that, for doing that import, and they'll be in your slide deck. But what I really want to do before we run out of time completely is I want to show you that, in fact, if I go into this movie table, I in fact really do have data. And if I go in, I created a view to show this to you, actually. So here's a view I created that's actually going to show the data. See, now I have data. There was no data in here before, right? And the same is true of all of the other tables. So if I go here and look at movie genre, now I have data in here as well. That would be a view, and there's the movie genres. Well, well, that's interesting. It must not be completely done. It must not have finished. Let me do a few more questions. Let's see what we got here. In the format ribbon, wait a minute, let me move this. In the format ribbon, what's the difference between trim and clean? Trim just takes any blank spaces off the bottom, and trim cleans the entire text of any junk. And a lot of times I do both trim and clean on text fields because it's pretty good practice. There will be, Jimmy, there will be a recording. Can a data flow source be pasted from a Power BI data set? And, oh, I think I know exactly what you're saying. Yes. This is a really great question, Bobby. I really appreciate you asking it. So when you are in this, particular interface, there is this product is really, really similar to Power BI Desktop. So in Power BI Desktop, when you go into the query editor, this is what it looks like. And there's a thing in here called Advanced Editor. And if you go in and you copy everything out of Advanced Editor here with a Control C, and then go over to, let me close this and close this. Well, let me drop it down at least. Well, let's see if I can close it. Wow. And then go over, back over to, now I'm back in the data flow editor online. If it also has an advanced editor. If I wanted to paste that query that I just had, whoops, I wouldn't have done that. I would go to get data and get a blank query. And instead of this that's on the blank query, I would paste this, which is from that Power BI workbook. And this is a technique I use a lot because the query editor in Power BI Desktop is faster by a long shot. And however, you can't do it with on-prem sources. It can only be done with online sources. I hope that answers the question. And then, are premium connectors available in the community plan? Yes. How do you fill the tables with data again? Mine always stays blank. Bobby, I think if you mean in this interface, what you do is you just click refresh and it should bring them in. Because it's really weird. In this UI, you can see the data preview in the UI, but something about closing the UI, you really have to refresh those data flows. And it actually happens when you go through the next process here. One of the things that it does before it pulls your data into the Dataverse tables is it actually does this refresh. But in Power BI, there are data flows as well. And you can finish creating a data flow in this interface, but when you go to use it for your report, there won't be any data there until you refresh the data flow. I don't understand it, but that's the way it is. Yeah, Power Query is everywhere, and it's going to be everywhere. And this area that we're looking at specifically, this data flow area, is definitely a huge area of investment for Microsoft. Their plans are definitely to make it so that everything that you can do with the query editor in Power BI Desktop can be done in this query editor online. And licensing limitations of Dataverse for Teams versus full Dataverse. You know what? That's a big topic. I will send a, if you email me about that, I'll send you some references on that. And is there a way to leverage SQL instead of, yes, Brian, thank you for asking the question. Brian's got good questions. You must be one of my 26% instead of my 84%. So there is a way to leverage SQL instead of M. What happens with M is really interesting. There's this phenomenon called query folding with M, and M is actually a no-code way to write SQL for the most part. And when a query is folding, what that means is that you've only executed commands or steps that could be done in SQL. And if you do all those at the beginning of your query will run more efficiently. And that query folding is just saying that we can do all these steps at once. We don't have to go to the server and come back, go to the server and come back, go to the server and come back. We can fold all these together and send them all at one time. And so a lot of times, especially in Power BI, what I end up doing, Brian, is I use the Power BI query editor to prove a concept, and then we go back and we, especially if the source is SQL, we'll go back and we'll create a view in SQL to do what we were doing with the query editor, just because it's just so, especially if we can't get that folding to happen. So there are things that will always break query folding eventually. So all merges we try to take back to the view, all even appends we try to take as much back to the view as possible. But one thing that we really don't consider a best practice, I don't think I have a way to show it to you because I don't have a SQL database up, but there's a way to actually, when you bring in a SQL query, to actually create the view in the Power BI query editor in there's like a little box to create it in. That's really against best practice. Don't ever do that. It's called a native query, I think. You don't want to do it. It breaks folding. Okay, why to replicate the Power BI desktop? The reason that I like to replicate the query, I use that method that I showed you with the advanced editor. I use that. There are a couple of use cases where I use it, where I've created the query in Power BI and I want to use it somewhere else. Like if I want to use it in Excel, or if I want to use it in a query editor online, I just don't have to create it again. You know, if I created it once already. And then the other use case, if I'm doing something that's pretty complex in the query editor, for instance, that Unpivot that I did in the query editor, that's a pretty, if I had a big data table, which I did not, if I had had a big data table, that would have really slowed that query down to a crawl. And I probably would have chosen not to do that in online. I probably would have chosen to do that in the query editor in Power BI. If a query can't fold, can it still be used in a data flow? Yes. Yes, it can. Yeah, and these aren't folding because this is an Excel source, so it's just not going to fold. It's just not going to fold. Yes, it still can, but what the deal with query folding is, if it won't fold, it's just going to be it's a place of inefficiency, right? So if you've got a query that's really, really, really slow, it's probably that's one place to look. But another place to look is, especially if you're in Power BI, another place to look is at your DAX. I think I got all the questions. If you all have more questions after you think about it, or if you look at the video, or even if you just didn't type them in, please feel free to download the slides and connect with me either on LinkedIn or with my email address. I also blog. So I don't blog as often as I'd like to, but I try to blog fairly often. So, you know, follow my blog. I always announce those in LinkedIn. And I think that we're over time and I really have to let y'all go. But thank you for connecting.